Just after 6 a.m. on February 1st, 1988, an emergency call came into police headquarters in Durham, North Carolina. A panicked teenager was on the line. He needed an ambulance at 2833 Fox Drive.
He had a walk gun and it went off. Where is he shot? I'm not sure. Just do it, please.
Paramedics and volunteer firemen were immediately alerted. Volunteer Doug Griffin lived just a few blocks away. He dressed quickly and drove to the scene.
Turning the driveway, there was a young man standing in the edge of their garage, a teenager. I asked him who was shot, where they were.
Without a word, 13-year-old Jason Stager pointed toward the house. Griffin hurried inside.
The hall was very dark. The last door on the right at the end of the hall was cracked open a little, but it was still dark. And as I approached the door opened suddenly and the light came on.
Standing in the master bedroom was Jason's mother, Barbara Stager. She said nothing to Griffin, but simply gestured to the bed. There lay her husband, Russ, shot in the head and in critical condition. Griffin was quickly joined by a team of paramedics. As the men worked on Russ, they noticed a cocked .25 caliber semi-automatic pistol on the bed. A sheriff's deputy took his wife downstairs to question her. Barbara told police that the shooting had been a terrible mishap.
She made the comment, "I kept telling him about those damn guns. I kept telling him about those damn guns, that something was going to happen."
She said that her husband, concerned about burglars in the neighborhood, had recently begun keeping a loaded gun under his pillow at night. That morning, she had awakened to the sound of her son, Jason, using the bathroom. Fearing that her husband might wake up and confuse Jason for an intruder, she said she had reached over to wake him up. She claimed her hand then struck Russ's gun, and it went off, shooting him in the head as he slept. The paramedics loaded Russ into the ambulance and raced toward the nearest hospital, Duke University Medical Center. The shrill siren echoed through the quiet, prosperous section of town. As neighbors awoke to the sound, it was hard to believe that the close-knit Stagers had been shattered by a senseless tragedy. Russ, 39 years old, was a popular baseball coach at Durham High School. Barbara, 40, a secretary, was active at her church and within the community. The couple had been married almost 10 years. Barbara had 2 boys from her previous marriage, Jason and Brian. The sheriff's deputies quickly came to the conclusion that Barbara Stager was telling the truth. On their report of the incident that morning, they called the shooting accidental.
That neighborhood, you don't think of something of that happening. I could first say, yeah, it could have very well been an accident.
Barbara's parents, Marva and James Terry, lived nearby. They met her at Duke Medical Center. Marva called Doris Stager, Russ's mother. Doris and her husband Al quickly joined Barbara and her parents in the waiting room. The news was grave. The bullet had lodged in Russ's brain. He could be kept alive on life support, but he would never again be a functioning human being.
We did say Russ wouldn't want to be a vegetable. I went in and I talked to Russ. I rubbed his arm. I told him I loved him. But no one ever knew whether or not he heard me.
Russ was removed from life support and at 12:35 in the afternoon on February 1st, pronounced dead. Brian, Barbara's oldest, who was attending a nearby college, arrived at the hospital just after his stepfather's death and was inconsolable. The woman who said she had pulled the trigger accidentally reacted quite differently.
Barbara was not emotional. Barbara never told me to forgive me. She never said, "I'm sorry."
That afternoon, Sergeant Rick Buchanan, a detective at the Durham County Sheriff's Office, drove to see Barbara Stager at her parents' house. The detective requested that Barbara come with him to the scene of the shooting so that he could ask her a few questions. She agreed.
I saw a little remorse. She was able to walk me through what happened that morning with no problem. Going back into the bedroom didn't seem to bother her.
Barbara told Buchanan a slightly revised story about the death of her husband. She said that she had actually been removing the gun from underneath the pillow when it went off, not, as she told police earlier, trying to wake her husband up. Despite this discrepancy and Barbara's oddly detached demeanor, Detective Buchanan also decided that the shooting had been an accident. That night, he filed his report and concluded that no further investigation was necessary. Hello, I'm Bill Kurtis. At first, Durham County Police had little reason to doubt a woman who, by all appearances, was a model citizen with a close family and a simple, straightforward life. But there was at least one person in Durham County who believed otherwise. The day after the shooting, Detective Rick Buchanan received a call from Russ Stager's ex-wife. She claimed that there was far more to Barbara Stager than met the eye. She told the detective that Barbara was no paragon of suburban perfection and no stranger to supposedly accidental tragedies. That story, when American Justice returns in a moment, here on A&E. This part returns now, here on A&E. On February 1st, 1988, Russell Stager died from a .25 caliber gunshot wound to the back of the head. His wife, Barbara Stager, said that she had been reaching underneath his pillow for the gun when it suddenly went off. Russ's ex-wife, Jolynn Snow, did not believe that Barbara was as innocent as she claimed.
I immediately said it was no accident. I knew for sure it was something that I needed to pursue and get more information on.
Jolynn Snow had remained friendly with her ex-husband since their divorce 10 years earlier. On several occasions, Russ had confided in Jolynn that his new wife had been having affairs and hiding financial statements. The day after Russ's death, Jolynn called Detective Rick Buchanan and set up a meeting. At first, he seemed uninterested in her story of the Stagers' marital problems. He told Jolynn that he had already ruled the death an accident.
So at that point, I said, well, do you know that her first husband was also killed by a gun? And she was the only person around. He sat back in his chair, and I had his attention for the first time.
Barbara's first husband, Larry Ford, had died in 1978. According to friends, Barbara's story was that Larry's gun had misfired while he was cleaning it. During one visit with ex-wife Jolynn, Russ confided in her that he had his doubts about his wife's account.
Russ was very knowledgeable about guns, and I think he found it very hard to believe. He said, I just want you to remember that if anything suspicious should ever happen to me, I want you to promise to look into it. And I promised him that I would.
Detective Buchanan realized that the coincidence was too great to ignore. He began looking into Larry Ford's death and Barbara Stager's past.
We had a detective who wouldn't let it go and who basically began to dig up the dark side. It got darker and darker.
Barbara Terry was born in Durham County in October 1948. As a child, she was the quintessential straight arrow. Went to church, never drank or did drugs, did well in school.
She was brought up in a Baptist family, very strict. Her mother was sort of the controlling figure and was a sort of severe woman.
In 1967, Barbara was accepted into Appalachian State Teachers College, a small school in western North Carolina. Free from the influence of her parents, within a few months, the 19-year-old struck up a passionate relationship with a classmate named Larry Ford. She soon became pregnant. Larry told his parents that he would marry her.
He was the Boy Scout. He was the upright fella. He was brought up that way, and he was a very sweet guy.
The couple wed on May 21st, 1968, and settled in Boone, North Carolina. Barbara gave birth to a son, Brian, that December. She left school and worked at a local bank while Larry studied to become a teacher. Barbara soon tired of her husband and began to look outside of her marriage for excitement. At work, it was widely rumored that she was having affairs with various bank customers.
She was having one affair after another on him. One of her lovers described her to me as just insatiable. She wouldn't let him quit till, he had performed 3 or 4 times.
Barbara also became increasingly obsessed with material possessions. She bought new cars, designer clothes, and pressured Larry into buying a larger, more expensive house in nearby Randolph County. The couple couldn't cover their bills, and the financial strain was taking its toll on their marriage.
She was just a lady who never quite had enough, always wanted a little more, and always trying to get a little more.
In 1974, Barbara gave birth to a second son, Jason. Barbara soon earned a real estate broker's license and started working for a local agency, but never managed to sell any houses. The couple sank further into debt and grew even further apart. On March 21st, 1978, Barbara had a co-worker at the real estate agency help her buy a gun. She needed it, she claimed, for protection against a stalker. She purchased a .25 caliber semi-automatic handgun. The co-worker took Barbara to a remote location to show her how to fire the gun and gave her some instruction in gun safety.
One of the things that was pointed out to her was, but just because you pop the magazine out of the weapon, if there's a round in the chamber, it will still fire. This is how a lot of people get killed accidentally with these guns.
That very night, Randolph County Emergency Dispatch received a call just after 12 o'clock that a shooting had taken place in Windermere Heights at the home of Larry and Barbara Ford. Randolph County Deputy Larry Allen was one of the first officers on the scene. He found Larry Ford in the upstairs bedroom, already dead from a gunshot wound to the chest. Barbara said he had accidentally shot himself while she was downstairs in the living room.
She said that she heard something. She went upstairs to see what the noise was, and she saw Larry laying across the bed, had blood on his chest, and he was gasping for air.
Randolph County Police believed Barbara's story and ruled the shooting accidental.
She said that she had just bought the gun that day. It was new. Larry was looking at it, I thought that what he had done is took the clip or the magazine from the gun, left one in the chamber, and while he was messing with it, he had shot himself.
Indeed, the ejected magazine lay on the bed. It appeared that Larry had made the fatal error Barbara had been warned about that afternoon. Unlike the police, Larry Ford's family did not believe Barbara's version of events. They noticed that after Larry's death, Barbara did not seem very upset. Their suspicions grew stronger 4 days later at Larry's funeral.
They heard Barbara at the funeral home standing by the casket saying, "What have I done? What have I done?" And the mother shutting her up.
The Ford family, however, seemed to be alone in suspecting Barbara. A detective took wipings from Larry's hands to determine if he had fired the gun, but inexplicably did not send them to the state crime lab for 19 days. When the test results finally came back, they showed that Larry had no gunpowder residue on his hands. He could not have fired the gun. The body was quickly exhumed and an autopsy performed. The case was reclassified as a homicide, with Barbara as the lead suspect. But the Randolph County Sheriff's Department had lost their window of opportunity. Ford's body had been embalmed, and the autopsy revealed no clear evidence of foul play. Police revisited the scene of the shooting and interviewed Barbara's friends and family, hoping to build a case, all to no avail. Many felt the police had conducted a completely inept investigation, and Barbara was now free through their incompetence.
For many, many years, people said, you know, if you're going to commit a murder, you should do it in Randolph County because you'll get away with it.
In the fall of 1978, a new sheriff was elected in Randolph County. Despite heated protests from the Ford family, the case was officially closed. The death was once again classified as accidental. By the time the new sheriff was sworn into office, Barbara Ford had already left Randolph County and was back home in Durham. When she was finally cleared, she was able to collect double indemnity on Larry's life insurance policy. She was over $100,000 richer and planning another wedding to Durham high school coach Russ Stager. Now, armed with the information about the demise of Barbara's first husband, the detectives investigating Russ Stager's death were ready to avoid the mistakes made by Randolph County and hold Barbara Stager accountable for murder. There was just one problem. The angle that Barbara claimed to have shot Russ from, an upward trajectory, was contradicted by the autopsy report.
Whoever fired that shot, namely Barbara Stager, was more firing downward at Russ Stager's skull.
To crawl back into that very bed and reenact what happened with little or no emotion made my mind up right then that this woman had killed her husband.
Detective Buchanan now set to work, uncovering the story of Barbara's relationship with her second husband. After the death of her first husband, Larry, Barbara had returned to her hometown of Durham, North Carolina. She met Durham high school coach Russ Stager, who was then getting divorced from his wife, Jolynn. The two began dating. They were engaged just 2 months later and married on March 17, 1979, less than a year after Larry Ford's death. Russ adopted Barbara's 2 sons and was by all accounts a wonderful father. The couple seemed to be a perfect match.
Publicly, she was a great individual. I mean, she attended church, she taught Sunday school. She appeared to be a loving and doting mother.
Some of Russ's friends, however, doubted that Barbara was all she appeared to be. Carol Gordon and her husband Bill socialized with the couple during the first years of the marriage.
My first impression of her was that she was reserved, a little distant. Barbara was a person that could appear to be one way, but was really not that way at all.
The Stagers, however, seemed happy together. They had at least one thing in common. They were both enamored with the finer things that money could buy.
I would go shopping with her, and she would do the shopping, and I would just be sitting in an amazement. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars worth of items at one time.
Their income, however, was not high enough to support their spending habits. Russ was making less than $30,000 a year, and Barbara, who now had a job selling commercials for a local radio station, made no deals. In 1982, Barbara announced she had found a solution: literary success. Barbara had often talked to Russ and their friends about a novel she was writing called Untimely Death. It was about a woman unfairly prosecuted for her husband's murder after he accidentally shoots himself. In February 1982, Barbara said that her book had been purchased by Doubleday, for $100,000. She produced a letter outlining her deal. After showing it around to friends, she went to the Central Carolina Bank and convinced the bank to let her use it as collateral on a substantial loan. Russ's friends were not so easily fooled. They called the publishing company to check Barbara's story.
We were told that there was no book, and yet she's told everyone that she's been spending incredible amounts of money.
Clearly, Barbara had forged the letter. Although they did not want to embarrass him, Russ's friends finally decided that they had to tell him about the hoax.
It wasn't too long after that that Barbara and Russ left our Sunday school class and left the church, which I'm sure they were very uncomfortable because Barbara probably didn't know that we might not tell some people.
Barbara's lies did not end there. One day, Russ came upon a box of unpaid bills, some almost a year old, hidden underneath a chair in the living room. Their financial situation, which Russ knew was dire, was now untenable. Russ's parents called a family meeting to try and help their son and his wife sort out their financial difficulties. The couple moved to a less expensive home, and Russ joined the National Guard to earn some extra money on the weekends. But there was another problem: infidelity. One day, Russ caught Barbara kissing one of her co-workers passionately in the empty parking lot of Durham County Stadium. Russ's mother urged him to consider a divorce.
I said, I think that you need to think about leaving her. And what was his reply? Mom, when I adopted those children, they were mine. It's my responsibility. How can I leave those kids?
Russ stayed with Barbara, and for a few years it appeared that their marriage had weathered the storm. In 1985, the couple managed to put a down payment on a more expensive home in an upscale neighborhood, 2833 Fox Drive. Russ also took steps to ensure that Barbara would be financially secure in case anything ever happened to him.
The investigation indicated that there were several insurance policies taken out on Russ. She was standing to collect a little in excess of $150,000.
Once they had pieced together the story, Durham County prosecutors were ready to secure an indictment. On April 18, 1988, Barbara Stager was arrested for murder. Assistant DA Eric Evanson began to prepare his case. Searching for solid proof of a motive, he enlisted the help of Russ Stager's mother, Doris, and his ex-wife, Jolynn Snow. The two women began sifting through Russ's personal files. Jolynn found a canceled check for $500 that Russ had supposedly written to Barbara a few weeks before his death. She was certain that the signature was not her ex-husband's. It was, in fact, a forgery. It proved to be the first step in unraveling a complex pattern of financial deceit that seemed to lead directly to the day of the shooting.
Barbara Stager had developed quite a large debt. She had involved herself in some bank loans unbeknownst to Russ Stager.
In the year leading up to the shooting, Barbara had taken out 3 different loans. Russ's signature was forged on at least one of them. For a time, she managed to make the payments, but when she fell behind and the bank threatened to call her husband, she paid the bank with the forged check from Russ's account. Barbara was now in a difficult position. At the end of January 1988, when her husband's bank statement was mailed out, her deceit would be discovered. Barbara shot Russ in the couple's bed on the morning of February 1st.
February the 2nd, the bank statement showing the $500 forgery, that bank statement is mailed to Russ Stager. Of course, he's not there to receive it.
The prosecution had its motive. Barbara Stager accused of murdering her husband Russ, was released on $250,000 bail. In the days approaching her trial, headlines played on the public's fascination with such an unlikely murder suspect.
It's stunning to think that you could be married to somebody, you know, sleeping in the same bed with them and not know that they were a killer, sitting right beside them in church.
The most shocking element of the case, however, was yet to be revealed. Less than 2 weeks before the trial, a student discovered a cassette tape near Russ Stager's old high school office. The recording was apparently made 3 days before the shooting.
This is Russ Stager. This is January 29th, 1988, 10 minutes of 2.
Russ spoke of Barbara's lies and his suspicion that she might be planning to do him harm. The DA's office immediately gathered members of Russ's family and played the tape.
Barbara had given me something that was supposedly for sinuses. 5 o'clock that morning I woke up and I was feeling terrible. I really hope that I'm being paranoid.
Very emotional, because my husband and I looked at each other and we knew that was Russell's voice.
Not everyone who heard the tape believed that they were hearing the voice of Russ Stager. Barbara's parents and her sons, Brian and Jason, listened to the recording at her defense attorney's office.
Barbara's family members said it wasn't his voice. I think people that want it to be his voice say it's his voice, and people that don't want it to be his voice say it's not his voice.
There was never any doubt in our mind that that was Russ Stager on that audio tape. There was just an incredible amount of detail.
Whether the tape was admissible as evidence would be the subject of a legal skirmish between the prosecution and defense. In the meantime, the defense was granted a motion to relocate the trial due to publicity. On May 1st, 1989, the murder trial of Barbara Stager began in the Lee County Courthouse in Sanford, North Carolina. The change of venue was a minor victory. The trial promised much more important legal battles.
Has a standing objection to renew the motion. The two issues in this case, the big issues was whether or not the death of Larry Ford could come in, and then this tape of Russell Stager.
The defense argued that the circumstances surrounding the death of Barbara's first husband were irrelevant.
If they have no evidence of it, not even enough evidence to charge her and submit it to a grand jury, then what is it doing in this case?
Ford was significant for the jury to show, namely, that this particular case was not an accident. The similarities in the crime indicated a common scheme.
Judge Allen ruled in favor of the prosecution. More importantly, he also allowed the mysterious audio tape to be played for the jury, even though there were no other recordings of Russ's voice to compare it with. Assistant DA Evanson began his case by outlining Barbara's financial maneuvering in the days before Russ's death. Handwriting experts were called in to testify that Russ's name had been forged on a number of financial documents, including the $500 check. The jury also viewed the videotape of Barbara reenacting the shooting.
I heard the awful noise. Well, wait a minute, that wasn't quite right. Okay.
The prosecution pointed out that, according to the autopsy report, Barbara could not have shot Russ from the angle she indicated. In addition, tests done on the pillows and comforter clearly showed that no gun had been fired on or near them. Evanson then called witnesses to the stand to testify about the eerily similar death of Barbara's first husband, Larry Ford.
In our case, we were not required to prove that Barbara Stager shot Larry Ford. However, it was our opinion and our belief that we did do that.
The most dramatic and perhaps the most damning evidence came on the 6th day of the trial. Portions of the audio tape were played, and the jury heard the voice of a man identifying himself as Russ Stager, a man worrying if his wife could be trusted.
The last few nights, during sleep, Barbara has woken me up to give me sleeping pills. Now, if I was already asleep at 4:30 in the morning, why would somebody wake me up to give me 2 sleeping pills?
Russ also talked about Barbara constantly going to pick up the mail, but he knew nothing about her secret loans.
My question is, why every time I turn around, she is taking that key and running over there to check the post office box? Unless there's something in there she's trying to hide.
The checks were returning, the bank was threatening to contact Russ, and then he was about to find out everything that she had been doing.
My question is, did her husband, Larry Ford, accidentally shoot himself? I really hope that I'm being paranoid about all this stuff that's going on, but I really wonder. This is Russ Stager. This is January 29th, 1988, 10 minutes of 2.
The courtroom sat in stunned silence. The prosecution's evidence against Barbara had just been corroborated by her alleged victim, Russ Stager. The state rested. Barbara's defense team did what it could to try and salvage the case. They argued that Russ did not behave like a man who believed his wife was going to kill him.
If I had concerns that my wife had killed a previous husband that was not accidental, and concerns that she might be doing it to me, I wouldn't have loaded guns sitting around my room.
The defense also attempted to introduce at least the possibility that Russ Stager was sleeping with a pistol under the pillow with the safety off.
Try to put that safety on, not get it all the way?
That's correct.
I don't think a total idiot would do that. Now, we're talking about Russ Stager was also a firearms instructor for the National Guard. Very safety conscious.
Though the evidence was overwhelming, Barbara remained confident that she would be found not guilty.
She had faith that she had not killed Russ, and that if she didn't do it, then she wouldn't be convicted.
I think she got away with the first one. And she felt that the second one would be handled pretty much the same way. They'll say, okay, no problem, and move on.
On May 17th, after only 45 minutes of deliberation, the jury found Barbara Stager guilty of murder in the first degree. The sentencing phase of the trial began the next day. The prosecution called for the death penalty, arguing that her crime was aggravated by the fact that she killed for monetary gain.
You were witnesses to one of the greatest evils you can ever see, when a wife murders her own husband for money.
The defense countered by calling Barbara's family and friends who still believed in her innocence as character witnesses. They testified that Barbara was a good mother and a good friend, not a woman who deserved to die. The jury sided with the prosecution. On Friday, May 19th, 1989, the jury returned its verdict.
That the defendant, Barbara T. Stager, be sentenced to death.
The date for Barbara Stager's execution was set for July 28, 1989. As with all death penalty cases, the sentence was automatically appealed. In 2 years, Barbara would be back in a courtroom, her life once again hanging in the balance. You tell us at ane.com. In May 1989, Barbara Stager was sentenced to death for the murder of her second husband, Russ. The North Carolina Supreme Court took up the case 2 years later in May 1991. Barbara's lawyers sought to overturn her conviction on the grounds that the evidence of her first husband, Larry Ford's death, and the tape allegedly made by Russ Stager should not have been allowed into the trial.
There was no case law that I could look to about whether or not the Larry Ford killing should come in. So I realized that what I did, if it was affirmed, would make new law.
The defense team also focused on the instructions given to the jurors during Barbara's sentencing.
At the time, the law in North Carolina required that the jury be unanimous on mitigating circumstances. Later on, the United States Supreme Court said that the way we were presenting it to the jury was not constitutional.
The ruling, called the McCoy decision, stated that even if only one juror felt that there was a mitigating circumstance in the case, the death penalty could not be handed down. Barbara's appeal was a split decision. On August 14, 1991, the North Carolina Supreme Court agreed with Judge Allen's ruling on the evidence and upheld Barbara's conviction, but granted her a new sentencing hearing. The new hearing began on August 16, 1993, at the Chatham County Courthouse in Pittsburgh. The jury would hear the same information that the prosecution presented in the first trial, and the defense team would once again try to paint the portrait of a woman who, despite her conviction, did not deserve to die. This time, Barbara Stager would need only one dissenting juror to have her life spared.
The first jury in Sanford in Lee County really, I think, was outraged at her conduct, at what they had heard. We were trying to put this second jury in the same position.
She was doing a lot of positive things during that period of time while she was in prison. She's not causing any problems at all in prison, so why put this person to death?
A number of people, friends, family, prison social workers, appeared as character witnesses for Barbara. Finally, there was one last testimonial from Barbara herself.
Judge Ellis allowed us to have an allocution, which is basically to let Barbara speak to the jury. And that was a major factor, I think, in humanizing her.
On Monday, August 30th, Barbara Stager spoke for the first time in a court of law about the death of her two husbands. While she took responsibility for Russ's death, she did not admit to murder. Barbara said, quote, "I have been convicted of taking Russell Stager's life. I'm really, really sorry for that. I feel bad that my actions and mistakes led to his death. I wish I could turn the clock back." She proclaimed that her faith in God was still firm and pleaded for the jury to give her another chance. For some, Barbara Stager's statement was a theatrical performance, not a genuine plea.
She did not misspeak one time. It was almost robotic. I couldn't imagine being in a situation like that and being so perfect with it. But she was literally perfect.
Her speech certainly affected the jury. On August 31st, 1993, they overturned the death sentence and gave Barbara Stager life in prison. Though her family and supporters were jubilant, many in the courtroom felt justice had not been served.
When the death penalty was reversed, does it upset me? Of course it upsets me. My son didn't have a second chance to live. My son didn't have a second chance to come and be with his family.
My reaction was disgust. I mean, if anybody's going to get the death penalty, it should be Barbara.
Under North Carolina law, Barbara Stager will be eligible for parole in 2006. She will be 57 years old. While she declined requests for an interview, some people still argue for her freedom.
She has continued to be a very positive person in prison. I think she does deserve an opportunity to be considered for parole.
On one hand, Barbara is a warm, loving individual. That's the side that she projects to the public. On the other side, what she does behind closed doors, she's very cold, calculating, and cruel.
I think when she gets out, some man somewhere better be concerned. You have to have 3 to qualify as a serial killer. She only got 2, but I'm not sure that she's finished, you know.
In August 1997, after 9 years in prison, Barbara Stager applied for clemency from North Carolina Governor Jim Hunt. She offered a number of reasons why she should be granted an immediate release from prison. She had no previous criminal record, her life sentence had been unduly harsh, and she didn't receive a proper psychological evaluation at her first trial. In addition, she said that, quote, "I was not a threat to anyone other than my husband." Her request for clemency was denied. I'm Bill Kurtis. Thanks for watching American Justice here on A&E.